water, only the snow by the roadside to eat. And progress was still painfully slow. We were simply a part of a long, wretched trail of refugees that was filling the road ahead of us and behind us as far as the eye could see. Sometimes the road became so jammed we could scarcely move at all. That was the worst of it. We seemed to be getting nowhere. Arguments were breaking out, tempers were fraying. Carly, though, seemed quite happy to be tramping alongside Marlene, holding her trunk and talking to her all the time. He did not once complain about his leg, about his wheezing, about the cold. I wish I could say the same for myself. My feet were in agony, my ears ached, and I was longing for something to eat, anything. When I mentioned any of this to Muddy, which I did, often, she would just put her arm around me and say with a gently reproving smile and a shrug, "Me too, Elizabeth, me too." It did not help. It did not make me feel any better. Sometime in the afternoon of that same day, we were walking along a road through a pine forest, I remember, and were making even slower progress than ever. Muddy suddenly took Marlene by the ear and without any warning led us off down a forest track away from the road. The walking was at once more difficult here, the going more arduous, and the snow deeper, but at least we weren't dragging along with the hundreds of others, being endlessly held up. Carly kept asking her why we were going this way. I did too, but Muddy wouldn't answer. "Just keep walking," she told us. Some of the other refugees back down on the main road were shouting out after us, telling us we would get lost in the forest. Muddy paid them no attention, but just walked on without answering, without even looking back. "I don't want any of them following us," she said. "We're better off on our own." After a while, once we were well out of sight of everyone on the road, she stopped and told us what she had in mind. "Poppy and me, children, when we were young, when we were first married, before you two came along, we used to cycle all the way from the city out to Uncle Manfred's farm. On the main road, it was a very long way round. Poppy was good with maps, and he discovered the shortcut. So after that, we always came this way. On our bicycles, it was a whole day's hard ride. On foot, I think maybe we could do it in 2, but we must not stop. We shall get too cold if we stop. Best of all, children, there is a stream only a couple of hours ahead where Poppy and I used to sit and have a picnic. We may not have the picnic, but we can drink all the water we like, can't we? We will just have to imagine the picnic, that's all. And maybe we shall find a house somewhere and can beg some food. You never know. One thing is for certain, we were never going to find either food or water back down on that road. And traveling that slowly, it was going to take us forever to get to the farm. We may have a bit of hard slog ahead of us, children, but we shall manage. We have got to, haven't we? And once we get to the farm, we will be warm and toast, and we shall have all the food we can eat. You remember how Aunt Lottie piles the plates? And there will be hay in the barn for Marlene. All of our troubles will be over, you will see." The thought of a drink of water and the hope of food must have given new strength to my aching legs. I strode on ahead up the snow-covered track. I heard the stream before I saw it, a great rushing torrent, tumbling down off the hillside and into a pool of bright water. I could see it was iced over in places. The water was freezing, of course, but we didn't mind one bit. Marlene stood in the pool and drank there, right with us, sloshing her trunk about in the water, loving every moment of it, as were we too. Here, for the first time, we could forget for a few moments everything that had happened. But once we were walking on again through the forest, we soon fell silent and thoughtful. None of us, I think, could forget the burning city we had left behind us, the suffering we had witnessed on that long march. And we could still smell the smoke. It seemed to be clinging to the trees all around us, drifting about us like a yellow mist. Carly was breathless now, stumbling ever more often, wheezing and coughing almost constantly. We were becoming more and more worried about him. I told Carly I would carry him, so did Muddy, but Carly would have none of it. He insisted on staying with Marlene, on walking alongside her, holding her trunk, and there was no arguing with him. But walking side by side behind him now, Muddy and I could see that his wheezing was becoming worse all the time. It was my idea, and all these years later, I am still quite proud of it. When I was little, before the war, Muddy, I said, I went on elephant rides in the zoo, didn't I? You took me, didn't you, before you worked there? So Carly could ride up on Marlene, couldn't he? Why not? I thought of that, but it is no good, Muddy replied. It was only the older elephants that were used for rides, and they have to be properly trained. And besides, Marlene is still too young. She has never in her life had anyone on her back. I have no idea how she would take it. It's worth a try, Muddy, surely, I argued. Carly cannot go on like this. Maybe you're right, and it is in Marlene's blood, that is for sure, Muddy conceded. I mean, her mother used to give rides in the zoo for years, till she got sick. Moments later, and as you can imagine, we had no arguments from Carly about this, we were lifting him up and sitting him there astride Marlene's neck. Much to Muddy's relief and mind, it did not seem to bother Marlene in the least. She just flapped her ears a little and groaned quite contently. With Carly riding now, and he was happy as he could be about that, of course, he was very soon wheezing less. As for Marlene, she plodded through the snow as if she had been giving rides all of her life. Somehow, the water I had drunk at the stream had managed to satisfy my hunger as well as my thirst. By the time the dark of the night came down around us, it was no longer hunger that bothered me so much as the cold. I had by this time lost all feeling in my feet and hands, but now the intense cold seemed to be seeping into my whole body and chilling me to the bone. Time and again I begged Muddy to stop. All I wanted to do was curl up in the snow and go to sleep forever. It was only Muddy that kept me moving that night. Time and again she had her arm around me, helping me on, and every so often she would whisper words of encouragement. Every step you take, Elizabeth, you are nearer to the farm, nearer to the food, and a warm bed, she would say. Just remember that, and put one foot in front of the other. That is all you have got to do, and we shall get there. To be honest, I cannot remember a great deal about the rest of the long, terrible night. I do know that one moment we seemed to come out of the trees and out onto the open hillside. Here we heard again the sound that we all feared so much, the air raid sirens, a distant rumbling, and then a roar of approaching bombers. In no time they were right over our heads. "What are they bombing?" cried Muddy. "Can they not see there is no city left to bomb? All they are bombing is fire." We stood there on that bleak hillside, quite unable to take our eyes off the huge fireball that was rising now over the city. No words could speak our horror, no tears could cry our sorrow. Even Carly had no more questions. We were some distance away from the city, but I could feel the warmth of that great fire on my face as I watched. I felt it shivering some of the cold out of me, and I have to admit that they were shivers of pure pleasure. But I was at once overcome with guilt. I was thinking about what a terrible thing it was, that while I was basking in the heat of it, many thousands of people must still be trapped in the city, some of them my own friends from school. I thought of them down in their shelters and wondered if any of them could possibly survive such a raging inferno as this. Muddy turned me away from it. "This is the last time we look back, Elizabeth," she said. "From now on, we only look forward." So we left the city to burn and went on our way. There was one more incident I do remember about the night, and it makes me ashamed to tell you about it. But I will tell you because I want you to know the story as it happened, not simply as I would have wished it to happen. No matter how often I begged Muddy to stop and give us a rest, Muddy would not listen. The more she refused, the nastier I became. In the end, she lost her patience and turned on me. "What do you want, Elizabeth?" she cried. "Do you want us to freeze to death out here? Do you? The farm is only a few hours away, 12 kilometers, maybe less. Now get a grip on yourself and just walk." I was angry back at her, hysterical almost, saying all manner of things I should not have said, about Puppy going off and leaving us, and how parents always ruin the lives of their children. She took me in her arms then and hugged the anger out of me, telling me how much Poppy loved me and she loved me, and how we had to survive to be there for Poppy when he came home. Carly, I remember, looked down on us, bewildered, from high up on Marlene. So as the bombs fell and Dresden was destroyed, we walked away, on, no strength left for arguing any more, no strength left even for speaking. The next morning, a gray-pink dawn it was, the growing light soft on the snow, we came down from the hills into the valley, a valley we knew and loved so much. And there below us we could see the farm where Uncle Manfred and Uncle Lottie lived, the familiar farmhouse with the barns and sheds all around, and beyond them the lake, now frozen over, and the island in the middle, our island. We had known such despair and sorrow during the night and found such joy in the morning. Marlene quickened her step noticeably, and, following along behind, so did we. She knew we were nearly there, and this was hardly surprising. I suppose, since Carly was whooping and waving up there on her back, and Muddy and I were laughing out loud in our relief. I noticed from some way off that there seemed to be no animals outside, but then I knew that was only natural. We had been there often enough in the winter for Christmas a few times, and I remembered that Uncle Manfred kept his animals inside during the worst of the winter months. But all the same, the place did look strangely deserted. Muddy spoke my thoughts exactly. There is something wrong, I think, she said. Aunt Lottie, she keeps that stove of hers going all the time. Winter or summer, I know she does. There is no smoke coming out of the chimney. As we came across the snow-covered fields and past the frozen lake, flocks of crows lifted off, most of them from the poplar trees out of the island, crawling at us, cackling us, angry at our intrusion. But they were the only sign of life. I ran on ahead of the others and opened the farmyard gate. The snow had drifted up against the front door of the house. There were no footprints in the yard, not one. A quick look told me that all the sheds were empty. Tommy was not in his stable. No chickens warbled from inside the henhouse. Muddy knocked at the door and called out again and again. No one answered. No one came. I left them and walked around the back of the farmhouse toward the hay barn, where Carly and I had played so often, leaping from the top of the stack to the bottom into the piles of soft sweet hay. That was what I was thinking of as I opened the barn door. It was dark inside, so I pushed it wide open to let the light in. There was a man lying stretched out in the hay, a man in uniform, an unfamiliar blue uniform. He looked fast asleep, or dead. I was not sure which. Muddy was there beside me suddenly, and Carly too. Marlene came wandering in after them and wasted no time at all before reaching up with her trunk, tugging at the hay, and stuffing it into her mouth. The sound of her grinding jaws was loud in the silence. "Who is he?" Carly whispered. "That is the enemy, Carly," Muddy said. "An airman from one of the bombers that has destroyed our city. British, RAF." She reached for a nearby pitchfork, gripped it tight in two hands, and advanced slowly towards him.